Greetings. I have done away with the backdrop today because there is quite a bit of rain outside and thunder, and I'm enjoying that. So please disregard any vehicles you may hear in the background or anything like that. This video is in response to the Cemetery's Confession channel post or video by the Count that is entitled, "Are You Born Goth?" I will not have quotes from intelligentsia or professionals related to this discussion. I probably will not be using as big of words as the Count does in that video, but I generally have a mind to contemplate things in the context of my own life experiences and obviously to convey those musings to you. The first aspect of that video that I want to address is the word mainstream. We use words because they are useful. They are utilitarian in conveying an idea from one mind to another. Generally, Goths have used and continue to use the term mainstream to indicate collectively people who don't participate in alternative cultures and subcultures and who hold a general disdain for the ways that those who do participate in alternative cultures and subcultures differ from the norm. These people conform to the same vague notion of what normal people should be like in their dislike of alternative people that we do when we label them as mainstream. Yes, you can overanalyze away a direct link between the individuals who make up what we call the mainstream, but that doesn't really negate the usefulness of the term. Showing that not every individual likes everything considered mainstream doesn't disinclude those individuals from the mainstream. A goth not liking Christian death or not wearing a jacket filled with goth band patches doesn't disinclude them from the goth culture, and these examples are synonymous. Mainstream is a collective term. It's not really intended to describe individuals, so arguing that the individuals don't necessarily agree on everything that is mainstream and that this dissolves all meaning from the term, that doesn't really follow. Now, there are actually other groups that also use the term or employ quips involving the term, such as the survivalist prepper communities, who often refer to those who follow stereotypical norms and eschew prepper norms as the mainstream or the lamestream. In general, we're talking about the same kind of people, just using different signifiers because we are unlike the prepper survivalist communities. But in this way, I justify the continued use of the word mainstream as a semi-derisive term. Now, that video brings up a lot of our experiences and the idea that we are only our experiences is an expression of the philosophy of hard determinism, which suggests that everything that we are is only the product of experiences that happen to us and the logical conclusion that we come to in reference to those experiences. Hard determinism has often been used to argue against the idea of free will, suggesting that human endeavor is always and can ever only always be predetermined by the experiences we encounter. I don't really wish to get into a full philosophical debate that's not really what I'm here for on this. But while I admit it's entirely possible that something may have happened to make you hate the feeling of raw cotton, or dislike country music, or avoid over-emotional environments, it's less likely that something has caused you to like the color green, or to enjoy the scent of lilacs, or be enamored with being in small spaces. There are also examples of people who enjoy the scent of skunks or other stimuli that most of the rest of us quite emphatically do not enjoy. I find it unlikely that an event happened that caused those individuals to enjoy such things. There probably wasn't anything that caused somebody to like the smell of skunks. There might have been, but I don't expect that there would be. I believe that it's an expression of self, something outside of what hard determinism is able to address. And if we are to act upon those proclivities, those actions provide a sort of free will and kind of fly in the face of hard determinism. Now, if one feels the absolute need to put a label on it with very brief study that I've made into the concept, I'd suggest that my view on this is a non-theological essentialism based on the individual rather than categories of people, and focus solely on human beings rather than all substances and forms. If only because I haven't bothered to think about applying it to those things. However, I employ this perspective only in the context of the Goth culture. As one of my memes that I made some time ago states, I am a skeptical atheist, but I'm really good at suspending disbelief for the sake of anything Goth. Goth is much more about what we like than what we dislike. I believe it could be intelligently argued that it is all about what we like. I believe many of the things that Goth is made of include those sorts of preferences, those expressions of self, and that this forms the backbone of why I consider Goth to be a culture rather than a subculture. Ultimately, the Count has portrayed the question of whether or not someone can be born as a Goth as a question born from our natures. I suggest instead that it's one born from linguistic and etymological sources. It should be noted that this stands as evidence that I am not really contradicting the message of the Count's video, but instead that I present a different perspective. Are we all born with black hair, dead flesh complexions, wearing Joy Division t-shirts? No, of course not. And I cannot believe any of us means that we suggest that someone was born Goth in that manner. Were we born with the preferences and inclinations that are likely to lead us to discover Goth later in our lives and find that it harmonizes with who we are outside the confines of hard determinism? It's possible. And that's, I think, what we mean when we say we're born Goth, those who do so. So the end result for me ends up being something of a yes and no answer to the question of whether or not we're born Goth. When we are born, we haven't had sufficient experiences to honestly claim any preference beyond being warm or cold, hungry or satiated, etc. I don't know of anyone yet who spent their time in the womb having Sisters of Mercy and alien sex fiend blasted at them in such a manner to create a preference. Please don't ever do that. So technically, no. We are not born Goth. But ultimately, however unlikely, It's conceivable that someone may initially develop and since birth continue to maintain an interest in those things that Goth is essentially made of. So within that context, yes, we can be born Goth. There was another thing that was kind of mentioned in that video that I also wanted to comment on a little bit, and that's adding the black stripe to the pride flags. I personally think that this is kind of wrong. I don't believe that we have the same struggle as those that the pride flag represents, and I feel trying to add Goth as an aspect to their struggle diminishes it. Now, Goths, of course, get our fair share and more of ridicule, but it's not the same. Yes, we've had experiences like Sophie, where a Goth has been killed because they're Goth. But these instances are so rare that they can't even begin to compare with the death rates, the murder rates of trans people and gays and lesbians throughout time. I mean, it doesn't even come close. So I personally think that it's wrong to try to include Goth on those flags. Also, and this isn't really something that is addressed in the Count's video, but it's something that I've kind of thought quite a bit about. And I've mentioned in other videos that one may view things objectively or subjectively, and I've championed objectivity, particularly in arguments or debate within our circles. However, I want to caution against an overabundance of objectivity. I think we need to be subjective about what we decide to be objective about in relation to Goth culture. Much in the nature of Goth is based on the unexplained, on the mysterious, the enigmatic, and supernatural elements that are foundational to our culture. If we lay those bare to the austere light of hard determinism and overanalysis, they disappear. And I believe that dismissal of mystery is really an antithesis of Goth. I think we need to leave the dark areas of mystery alone, accepting entropy and mystery to remain. Also, a somewhat amusing perspective on whether or not a tree falling in a forest with no one around to hear it doesn't make any sound. Many sources have verified that sound pollution can have an effect, a detrimental effect, on plant life. At lesser degrees, it's questionable whether or not the sound of the tree falling, the wave movement through the medium of atmosphere, will have any appreciable effect on the other plant life, but the wave still moves through the medium. The nearby trees may not react to the sound, but there's no guarantee that a human would react to the sound. So the movement of waves through a medium happens, and we call this phenomenon sound. So the answer to the question is yes, the falling tree makes sound, even when no human is around to hear it. One strong conclusion, though, that I think that we can arrive at is that it doesn't matter if one was born Goth or not. It doesn't make that individual any more or less Goth than any of the rest of us. It's kind of a silly phrase, and people will likely and rightly make fun of you for making the claim with any attempt at seriousness. Thank you.